Welcome to Tiny Garage Fabrication. Today we're still at work on the C10 shop truck. In this episode I'm going to try to get the clutch pedal in. I've got an aftermarket solution. Then I'm going to try to get on with some of the wiring, maybe a little bit of plumbing on the front end, and possibly set the EFI in place, just to kind of get a feeling for how I need to do wiring. That's it for the intro. Let's get to work. I realized after last episode I didn't really do any shots to see how the truck sits since I lowered the rear. It's not bad. It's not real low. As I stated, I want to do a 2-inch lowering block in the rear, as well as a 2 to 2.5 inch drop spindle up front. That should get her down in the weeds pretty good. But one of the issues with going that low is that I'm going to have to do a C-notch on the frame if I want to do that, and that's a pretty big job. So I'm not looking forward to that too terribly much, which is why I'm not too concerned about doing that right now. Anyway, let's get to working on the clutch installation. Okay, so here are the components I'll be working with. I've got this Wilwood aftermarket clutch pedal, and that will go inside. Hopefully it'll be a good distance from the firewall to sort of match the other pedals. I haven't even mocked it up yet. The original C10 pedal box has all the mounting for a clutch pedal, but I haven't been able to locate a stock style clutch pedal. A lot of the aftermarket suppliers don't carry the pedal and pivot assembly. Otherwise I would simply put that in, and I would drill a hole near the top and add a clevis like this to go to the master cylinder that I'm about to hang. So this is what I have for now. I'm going to try to place the master cylinder in a spot that should align with the factory clutch pedal. So hopefully if I can find a factory one, then I can take this out and swap it over later. I'm going to be feeding it through a -4 AN braided line. Now this is going down to the factory style slave cylinder in the NV3500, which I have adapted the little push lock fitting to a -4 AN with a nifty little component that I found. Now as far as the master cylinder goes, I have two. They're both 3/4 inch, so it's the same volume. It just comes down to size and, you know, taste. Which one do I like? This one obviously a lot smaller in every dimension, and this one has the feed coming out of the front, and I've got it pointing down. This one comes out of the top, which may also be beneficial because I might be able to run it up along the firewall and down. So they'll sit more or less here, give or take, you know. So this one will come out to this spot. It'll clear the booster just fine, and this one will also clear the booster just fine, with the exception of this. This is like a support rod that, you know, would pretty much be in the way for that. And then if you imagine this cap sticking out over here, will also be in the way. So I'm going to go without this support rod. There's another support rod that goes from the front down to this bolt right here. That would be this support rod. So with this in place, you know, I think I'll be fine to not run this one as well. So here's the space I have to work with. Looks like I may run into some pretty big issues. So the wiring being in the way is not too much of a concern to me. The factory clutch pedal would hang down here, so it would come down right in this area. That's where the factory clutch pedal would be, and I'm kind of limited on firewall space by the fuse block and maybe a couple other things. There's a rib right here in the way. Got a relay mounted up here. Looks like that spot of that relay might be where I want to go. Relocate that. Get this thing in there. I mean, that's not terrible. I just need to find a flat spot on the firewall to put this. Okay, so here's what I've come up with. Not a lot of room to work under there. I had to rip a little bit of insulation off. There were also a couple of relays right here, one of which I'll need to reinstall, which is the horn relay. And it will fit back in the space once I'm done. Now, what kind of sucks is this big rib right here. And I'm either going to find a way to get around it, or I will just go on top of it and then maybe try to find something to kind of fill in the back side here for stability. Now this hole right here I'm going to index the top master cylinder bolt hole off of. So I'm going to drill through this side out into the firewall, and then from there I'll be able to template the firewall, then drill back through into the interior, and I'll show you where that kind of leaves things. So this, all right, so the pedal is now kind of on that top bolt hole, and as you can see, it leaves the pedal in a decent place. You know, not perfect, but it will be pretty good, I think. So here's the hole that I drilled through. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm just gonna wing it. So we're looking at 2 1/4 inches. Now that I've got the measurement for the bolt holes, I'm going to go ahead and mark it on the firewall and the pilot hole that I drilled from the inside out. Having those measurements, I'm going to go ahead and draw a line between them, split that distance, and drill a hole in between them, and this will be for the main body of the master cylinder to come through. I'm going to go ahead and remount these holes, ensure that my bolts fit and that the pedal hangs on them, and I'll ream them out any larger if I need to, just for some wiggle room. So 1 3/8. And now that I know the size that I need to drill for the center of the master cylinder, we'll go ahead and get a pilot hole drilled into there, and then use a hole saw of the proper size and cut that hole open. Now remember, this firewall does have basically 2 pieces to it, an outer, and then there's that little lump or rib on the inside. So I'm going to have to go from the inside and drill outwards in order to connect this hole. And there it is. Fit the master cylinder in place, and from the inside we'll fit the pedal up, push one of the bolts through, and then we'll get it snugged up with a single nut just to ensure fitment, and then we'll move on to getting the rest of the accessories fitted up and checking for clearance and viability. See if I want to use this master cylinder or the other one. Now with this rod in place, I can remove the cap. It looks like I'll be able to keep this rod. I said I wouldn't earlier, but it looks like I will. Moving on now to getting everything else cleaned up, all of the stuff that I had to pull through or move when I painted the firewall. Starting with the windshield washer hoses, and then we'll move on to the parking brake cable. We'll get that thing routed and secured in place where it needs to be. And from there we'll move on to the master cylinder itself. We'll get the proportioning valve set in place, get its little bracket put back in place. And then I can grab the brake hard lines and get those set in place and secured down where they need to, and get them started in the proportioning valve. That way we can get to plumbing this thing eventually. Alright, I've been talking about the fuel injection enough. It's time to get it out of the box, put it up here, and kind of see what it looks like. As you see, it's pretty dusty. It's been in my attic for a couple of years, literally. This is the Edelbrock E Street 2 EFI. A manual, quick start guide, the installation instructions, warning about some stuff. There it is. Neat little unit. I like that it's sprinkled black powder coat, so it matches everything already. Nice machining. So we've got sensor here. This is a -6 fuel inlet. So that's why I kept my fuel hose long, so that I could make sure that I get to that. She's got 4 fuel injectors, idle air control, vacuum ports, throttle position sensor, map sensor, air intake temp sensor, more vacuum ports, and the linkage. Pretty simple. Should pop under here about like that. That looks pretty good. Here's the ECU. So this has one big plug on it. Gonna have to figure where to route that. I think, I don't know if you can see it on the, yeah, I think maybe this right here, where the clutch linkage went through. I think that might be our ticket for getting the wiring into the cab. Here's the O2 sensor with wiring harness. Here's the main wiring harness for the fuel injection system. Seems pretty nice. Comes with relays, fuses. Everything is wired. 12 volt switched, 30 amp, main relay. It's got a nice little junction, so this is from the ECU, and then it goes out to everything else. Bluetooth, so this should go to the antenna, which will allow me to tune it off of my cell phone. Here's the fuel pump output, TAC input, O2 sensor, ignition control only. Now I do have ignition control, we'll break that out in just a moment. And battery positive, battery ground, pretty self-explanatory. And this here is the harness that goes to the unit itself. So is your coolant temp sensor, goes to a coolant temp sensor that I have to wire in. Everything else, idle air control, map sensor, fuel injectors, the other 2 fuel injectors, air temp, and TPS. That's all the stuff I covered already. Should go there. Coolant temp sensor will go up here, probably into the thermostat. I ordered a housing with extra sensors, or here, whatever. Well, not here, that's for the heater. Yeah, some zip ties, some wiring. This is for the fuel pump. Pre-terminated ends, I like that. I'm probably going to cut this and have my own ends anyway, because this looks incredibly too long. So my fuel pump it's just right down there currently. Maybe I'll keep it long for when I go to the other tank. That might be a good idea. Here's some extra pins for a harness, the ground, mag, or Hall effect. So here's coil negatives. So this is for like a HEI type distributor, and a few extra wires for some pigtails. After that, we have the coolant temp sensor. We've got a universal bung for it, so I could put it right here. It's probably what's going to happen. Now we've got what appears to be some sort of a mounting tab. We've got a couple of grommets. We've got a throttle return spring. We've got some screws to mount the thing, and we have an O2 sensor bung and an O2 sensor bung block off. Finally, this will be the antenna. Like I mentioned, this thing is Bluetooth. So we've got a little thread-on adapter for the antenna itself. Appears to be, it's a little magnetic antenna. We can go ahead and put this wherever, but this will be in the cab. Whether the ECU is under the hood or whatever, I'll get good Bluetooth signal in the cab. So here's the app. Alright, so put it into demo mode. And, you know, I can have gauge displays. So you can have the basic eTuner display, gives you some info. I can have an all digital display, gives me all kinds of stuff here. EFI dashboard, and then I can change the look and the gauges. This also gives me setup wizard, lets me know, you set up advanced tuning. I can set all these individual parameters. Like I can add a rev limiter, I can change the base timing, fan control and AC idle up. That's pretty cool. So it has automatic outputs for all this stuff, so I can just go ahead and program it, tell it when to turn my fan on. If I go electric fan, definitely will have AC, so that's kind of nice. You know, that one's not there yet, but that's for the you know, self-learn and for loading map and making your own maps. It's got about everything I need, and it's Bluetooth, so that's kind of cool. So this is the Edelbrock ignition control kit for the E Street 2 EFI. So I haven't looked inside here yet, but it's just you know, it's a computer controlled distributor. So this will plug right in to the wiring harness. This will drop right into the back. This uses HEI type terminals, which is good because I've got some really good Magna Core race wires. Yeah, this thing's going to be cool. Alright, well, I'm going to spend a few minutes dicking with this, looking at how I want to route the wires, and we'll get back to you. Now, what I didn't mention a little bit ago was that the push rod for the master cylinder is actually a little bit short. I would have liked to be able to find like a long 5/16 18 nut, but I couldn't find one, so I'm sort of making one right here out of a small piece of spacer and 2 nuts. Ground off all of the chrome and the zinc plating so that I get a good weld. I'll just go ahead and zap these things on real quick. I'll move it over and we'll kind of grind off the excess, and then I'll get a file and I'll make sure to clean up the flats on opposing sides. That way I can still get a wrench on it to tighten it. Now I'm going to lay those down, so I wasn't able to take the head off this bolt, so I'm going to go ahead and use my bandsaw. Basically all I need is a stud, and I didn't have any threaded rod in my shop. I thought I did, so I'm having to cut the head off a bolt to do the same thing. Alright, here it is. It's fugly, but it's functional. Now we're looking at about 1.25 inches, and with a little bit of that and a little bit of this, you know, it'll give me about another inch, which is really all that I needed. Would have been a lot nicer if I could have just bought something like this. Alright, so here we go. The issue I had with the thing is about 1 inch too short, so now I put this in with some red Loctite, so it shouldn't be coming loose. Now I've got, you know, about another inch here, and then I've got adjustment to go out a little bit longer if I need to. Perfect. Moving on to getting the rest of the stuff put in place, starting with the water pump. I'm using a little bit of gasket maker here just to get the gaskets to stick, as well as some on the back side of the water pump. Now this is a reverse rotation water pump, which isn't what this truck would have normally come with, but due to the accessory drive that I'm running, it needs to be reverse rotation. Now here's the accessory drive. This is one half of it that holds the alternator and power steering. Now this came off of a 94 or 95 Suburban. So this had technically the Gen 2 small block, the Vortex series. So some of the holes are just slightly off. You'll see me have to kind of ream them out a little bit with one of my step bits just to make sure I get all the bolts to line up well. Now I've used this same style of serpentine drive before in my 1950 Ford. It's a super cheap solution. Instead of spending $600 or $700 on a system, this was about 80 bucks out of the junkyard. Now we'll get the core support put in place. You can see I obviously cleaned this up and rattle canned it. And once the core support is in place, we can move on to the inner fenders. Now the inner fenders are also cleaned up and rattle canned, and now I need to make a little mark for clearance for the shock relocation brackets that I installed in a previous video. And with some real quick grinder work, I've got a little notch cut out for those, so you can see right here. Now, installing the fenders is pretty simple. One thing you'll want to keep in mind, as well as making sure you have all of the multitude of nuts and bolts in place, is to keep it loose. That way you have a little bit of wiggle room when you go to put the fender on, which has even more nuts and bolts, most of which don't want to fit for you, and that's why you do have to keep everything loose. It's just to have that little bit of wiggle room for misalignment. And sometimes the misalignment still isn't enough, and you might have to fight and or cuss a little bit, which I may or may not have done right about here. Now, for your sanity, I'm not going to show me putting together the driver's side, which was even worse than the passenger side. But, man, does this ever look good. Throwing the inner cowl on real quick, that's like the finishing touch for the fenders, because it does share a bolt with them. And about 8 little screws hold it together. Finally, we'll move on to the wiring here. This is an American Auto Wire harness. Really nice. The previous owner spent probably a good amount of money on this. It's a custom fit harness specifically for this truck, and he never really finished installing it, so it still has some loose ends and things were just sort of kind of bundled. I'm going to go ahead and reroute them the way that I want them. They're going to kind of go through the fender, and I'm going to try to tuck it and hide it as much as possible. Alright, I'm going to go through all this separately, and I'm going to route it the way I want it routed so that it makes sense to me. And while I'm at it, I'm going to wire in the fuel injection once I figure out where I'm going to put the ECU. That will come next episode. Wiring, wiring, wiring. Well, I've had about enough for today. Got really far on the truck. The front end is, for the most part, together. The results kind of speak for themselves. This thing's turning out real good. I didn't do my best job of separating shop truck from show truck, but I have to do what I have to do. Once again, I didn't meet my goal of getting the wiring done. I at least got the harness put in place. It's coming through the firewall. And next episode, I'm going to go through. I'm going to route the stuff, I'm going to loom the stuff, I'm going to get the fuel injection wiring where it needs to go, as well as get the fuel injection ECU set up. And then after that, there's only a few more things to do. Sort of, kind of, not really. But we're going to be hammering through and getting all this stuff done. So I've got about a week to get this thing off the road, or else we're going to lose the shop. Now, it's really not that dire, but I am pressed for time, so I got to get this thing on the road and out of here. As always, smash the like button, leave comments, subscribe. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next video.